Hi everyone, welcome again. So let's see what we are going to cover in this video. Same as before, we have an existing MySQL database, and in the existing project, we have an entity, a small user entity that is mapped with the database table. In this video, we will try to understand how to use JpaRepository, which is another interface from the Spring framework, and we'll see how to fetch records using pagination. That means records in pages, and we'll also see how to fetch records in sorted order. So let's say if we want to fetch records by username in ascending order, how to do that. So let's get started. Starting with the database table, here we see that we have this user table in this database, and this table has 5 columns and it's empty right now. We'll insert few records in this table so that we can use the pagination and sorting. Moving on to the code base, let's revisit the code base. So we have this user entity which is mapped to the database table, and we are simply using @entity annotation and @id and generated value on the id attribute of this class, which is the primary key. And we also have the toString method so that we can see the output on the console. Apart from this, in the last video, we created the user repository, which is extending the CRUD repository so that we don't have to write the basic operations, basic CRUD operations, and we can utilize the capabilities of the Spring Data JPA. And if we go to the main method, there is nothing but an empty application runner bean that we are creating with dependency on the user repository so that we can run this code before the completion of this run method, which is executed by the Spring Boot when we execute or when we start the application. So that is a very basic code base, and if you're not aware of the details, I'll recommend you to watch my previous video in the playlist where we have set up this code base using Spring Boot and everything. And before we start, let me show you the application properties as well, where we have configured the database details. So we have used these properties to pass the username, the root password, the URL, database URL where the application can find the running database, then show SQL so that we can get the SQL printed on the console, the SQL generated by the Hibernate framework. And the last property is DDL auto, which will enable Hibernate to update the DDL or update the database schema in case there is a mismatch found. So let's say if there is a table required for some operation, then Hibernate can generate it if it's not there in the database already. So going back to the main application here, before we do anything, let's insert some records in the table so that we can read them. To do that, we'll run a loop so that we can insert some dummy records, and we'll say I less than or equal to 20. Let's insert 20 records, I plus plus, and inside this loop we'll create user objects, new, name, email, registration date, and active. So let's make the name dynamic by using this I. Same with email, @gmail.com. The third constructor parameter is registration date, so we can keep it same for now. Local date of, year, month, and date. And next argument is active. So let me say true. By default, all the records are active. And inside this loop, we also need to save the user object. So we can use the repository to save individual user records. We can also create a list and call save all, and we can pass the list of entities, but it will also do. And if we run the program, and we see that Hibernate inserted 20 records, we can see the SQL generated by the Hibernate, and we can verify the same if we trigger the select query. So if we run the select query, we see the 20 records. Now that we have some records in the database, let's move on and use the pagination and sorting one by one. Before we use pagination or sorting, we need to make one more change. If we go to the user repository that we created, we see that it is extending the CRUD repository, which is coming from the Spring. You can see the package path here. This is coming from the data repository package. if we open the CRUD repository, we can see lots of methods defined in this interface: save all, find by ID, but there are no methods related to pagination or sorting. So if we are using the CRUD repository, we cannot use the features related to pagination and sorting. To do that, we need to make some changes in the user repository. Instead of CRUD repository, we need to use another repository from the Spring framework, which is JPA repository. Everything else remains the same, but if we open the JPA repository, we see that from here we can see that the JPA repository interface is extending a couple of other interfaces, which is list, CRUD repository, list, paging and sorting repository, query by example executor. But we don't see anything related to pagination and sorting here, any method related to pagination and sorting. But if we open the list, paging and sorting repository, one of the interfaces that JPA repository extends, in this repository, we see one method find all, which has something to do with the sorting. So we can see it accepts some kind of parameter related to this sort data type. And if we open the paging and sorting repository, which is again the parent repository for this one, in this we can see that we have the support for paging and sorting both. So the bottom line is, in order to use the pagination and sorting, we need to use JPA repository. So we changed the user repository. It is now extending the JPA repository. Now notice there are no other changes required. If we use the save method, it's going to be the same. We can still insert the data. There is no need to change other code. We don't need to change the entity or anything. Now that the user repository is extending the JPA repository, we can use the pagination and sorting support. So let's do that. Let's move on, and we can comment this code now because we have already inserted the data in the table and we have these 20 records. So we don't need to execute this code anymore. We can comment it. And now we can play with the sorting. So before doing the sorting, let's try to fetch the records and let's see in what order we get the data back. So we can say user repository, and we already know how to use find all. So we do this, and for each we can get the record printed on the console. So we say system.out and println. Let's run the program. Here we can see that the Hibernate fired a select query, and we can see the output. We can see the records, 20 records. So this is ID starting from 252 to 271, and we have the name, email ID and all the columns. Now let's try to get the records but in a different order, because the names and emails are relatively same. So what we can do for this demo, we can use the ID to sort the records. So let's say we can try to fetch the records in the decreasing or in the descending order of their IDs, so that we get 271 first and 252 at the last position. So let's try to do that. To use the sorting, we'll use the repository and we say find all. Now this method find all accepts a sorting parameter, so like this. And if we type sort, then we see some of the methods like sort.sort, which accepts a class type, then sort.by, which accepts the direction and some properties, sort by, which accepts multiple order parameters. This one accepts multiple properties, and similarly this one accepts orders but in a list. The simplest one is to use this one. We say sort.by, then we provide the direction, ascending or descending, and then the property, and it will be the name of the property that we want to use for the sorting. So in this example, because we want to sort on the ID, so let's provide the direction, which is an enum. So we say direction.descending, and then we need to provide the name of the property, which is this one, simple ID. Because if we go back to the user entity, this is the name of that property, and that's what we have provided here. So what we are telling to Spring JPA, that fire a query and sort the records in the descending order by this property. And this again returns the iterable. So we can use the for each so that we can print the records. like this. Let's run the program and verify the order. Here we can see that this time when Hibernate fired the query from the user table, we see an additional order by clause, by ID and descending. That's what we provided in the method call, right? We provided the property ID, which is being used here from the user table, and the direction descending. And if we check the output, we see the 271 record with ID 271 at first location and 252 at the last location. So the records are basically in the descending order of their IDs. So to use the sorting, we use the sort class. We pass a combination, a sorting parameter to the find all or any method, and it will apply that sorting. So we saw one way to sort the records by using sort.by, providing the direction and the name of the property. Moving on. So let's try a different method from the sort class. So we do something like this: user repository dot find all and sort dot by. So earlier we used this one, we provided a direction and the property. We can also provide the order, this one. So let's see what this order is. If we select order, then we see different methods like order.ascending, order.by, order.descending. So let's say we want to do the same thing. We want to fetch the records by ID in descending order. So we use order.descending and then it accepts a property. So we pass it the property ID. Now this is just another way to do the same thing. Let me comment this one. So what we are doing, we are saying that get this ID and fetch me records by this ID in descending order. Let's run the program and verify the output. And we can verify that the Hibernate fired the same query. If you notice here, order by ID descending, and we can see the results in the descending order of their ID. So 271 at the first location and 252 is the last record. Till now we have been using the single property, but what if we want to provide multiple properties? What if we want to sort the results by multiple properties? We can do that. If you notice sort.by, it accepts a variable argument of order. So we can provide multiple orders here. Now we need to provide another order here. So we'll say order dot, let's say descending this time, this one, and we need to provide a property. And this time let's sort the result by name in the ascending order. So we are saying that, so we are telling Hibernate to use this sorting criteria, ID in descending order and name in ascending order. So let's run the program. And here we see that that's what Hibernate did. If you notice the order by clause, we see ID in descending order and name in ascending order, which is basically the default sorting order. And you can verify the output in the same order as well. All right. So that's how we use sorting. Using sort class, we can combine multiple properties with different sorting orders, or we can provide the direction. So it's up to us how we feel comfortable with sort class. Moving on, let's quickly understand what do we mean by pagination. So you might have seen on the UI applications, front-end applications, that we generally don't show all the records at the screen at once. For example, we may show first 10 records, and when the user scrolls up, then the application will fetch next 10 records. Or maybe we are showing the data in the form of a table with number of pages 1, 2, and 3. So we show first 10 records, and when the user clicks the second page, then we fetch next 10 records and show those records on the screen. So that is pagination. In order to implement the pagination, we need to define the number of records per page, and that is going to define the total number of pages. Suppose we have 50 records in a table and we say that the number of records per page is going to be 10, then in total we are going to have 5 pages. So when we write some code and ask Spring to read the first page, it's going to read first 10 records and it will return the first 10 records to the calling application. And when we ask for the second page, it's going to read next 10 records starting from 11th. So that's how pagination works. Now that we understand the pagination, let's give it a try. So we have the user repository and we call find all method. And this time we will use this find all, which accepts a pageable. Okay. Now what is this pageable? Pageable is a type which holds the information about paging. And there is this implementation of pageable that we are going to use, which is page request. Now, if we use the page request, we see it has some factory methods like of, this one which accepts two parameters, page number and the size of that page. Then this one which accepts the page, the size and the sorting. As a starter, let's use this one. So the first parameter is the page number. Now in Spring JPA, pages start from 0. So the first page means we need to pass the index 0 and the number of records per page. So let's pass 5. So we are saying get me the first page and 5 records. And we know that find all returns the iterable. So in order to get the records, we will use for each and we'll get the records printed like this. And before we run it, let's comment the sorting code and let's run the program. Notice the query triggered by the Hibernate. This is the query triggered by the Hibernate select query, and it is now using limit clause. And we got 5 records, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the first page. So starting from name 1, name 2, name 3 and name 5. If you go back to the database, these are the 5 records that we see on the console. And just to check what we can do, we can ask for the next page, and this time we'll pass the index 1. So we'll say first give me first 5 records and then give me next 5 records. And let's print a separator here and run the program. And this time notice that Hibernate triggered 2 queries. For the first call, this is the query using the limit. And for the second call, because we are asking for the next page, it again triggered a select query. So these are the first 5 records starting from ID 252 to 256, name 1 to name 5. And these are the next 5 records with name 6, and the last record is name 10 in the list. So what we did in the find all method, we passed the information using pageable, and we used the implementation page request. Then we passed the page number, which is 0 based, and the number of records per page. Now let's see, we want to get the records using pagination, but we also want to sort the records. So something like this, get me the first 5 records sorted by the ID in descending order. How do we do that? Let's add a separator again, and this time we can comment it, and let's use find all page request dot. If you notice this method, it accepts a third parameter sort. We have already seen how to use sort, which is here. So let's use this one. This time we'll say get me the first page with 6 records and sort by order must be descending and sort by ID. And let me copy the for each. So we are saying get me the first page starting from the 0th index, and the number of records must be 6, but the records must be ordered by ID in descending order. So let's give it a try. And notice the output. This time we got 6 records, but the first record is with ID 271. And if we check the table, this is the last record. So what it did, it ordered the records based on the ID in descending order, then returned the first page with 6 records. So we see 271 and the last record is 266. So that's how paging works in Spring, and that's how we use page request. And there is one more thing that we can do. So if you notice the of method here, so first argument is the page index and the second argument is the number of records. Now in these two calls, we changed the page index, but we always ask for 5 records. We can also change this. So let me comment this one and uncomment this one. And this time we'll say get me the first page, and in this call return 5 records. But when you read the next page, which is the index 1, this time get me 8 records. So we can change the number of records for the page we are asking for. And this time if we run the program after changing the code, so we see for the first call we got 5 records, but for the next call, which is for page number 1, we got 8 records, 3, 3, 6 and 2, 8. So we saw how to use page request. Page request is very flexible and it makes the pagination super easy. In the next video, we will see how to filter the records using where clause using Spring Data JPA without writing any code. So that's it for now. Thanks for watching.